Think we'll just dive right in, I suppose. To those of you who are joining us, thanks so much for taking the time. We're looking forward to having a good discussion. My name's Carolina Kirby-Lucier. I'm joining from Allstacks, and I'm going to be the moderator and ask these panelists some great questions and kick us off today. I won't bore you with too many logistics, but we'll try to keep the call to about 30 minutes. We are recording it so that for those of you who might want to share with your colleagues or refer to something later, you can do so. I will email that out afterwards, and I'll introduce you to everybody. The gentlemen on the call today bring different perspectives from different size teams and industries. I'm really excited for them to be sharing their knowledge. Despite them coming from different places and having different backgrounds, one thing that brings them all together is the passion that they have for leading people and their approach to how they do so. So without further ado, I would love for you guys to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your organization, and it would be great to hear if you have a leadership philosophy to kick things off. Hirsch, I guess we'll start with you.
Sure. So, Hirsch Depedia, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Allstacks. My background's always been actually in engineering and product leadership. I got kind of thrown into the deep end really early in my career, coming out of college and pretty immediately building out a product and engineering team and leading it. So tons of interesting learnings and kind of mistakes along the way. Been doing it for about 10 years. Big part of my philosophy on how I like to lead people is I want to empower people to kind of lead themselves when necessary, and then also give them the support and infrastructure in which they can very safely make mistakes, take risks, take actions, kind of stick their neck out and accomplish things that otherwise may not squarely fit in their specific job description. When you see what people reach for, that's when you learn a lot about, where can we take them together. So always looking for those opportunities.
Appreciate you sharing. Over to you, Toby.
Hi, I'm Toby Owen, and I'm currently Senior Director of Product Management for NetApp. Carolina's trying to promote me there on the slide. I'll take it. I've been in product roles for the last 13 years, and in the IT industry over 20. And so I've been on the the operations side as well as the designing solution side, and I've led small teams and large teams. Currently leading a team at NetApp around a product that we're going through a major launch and lots of transformation. And so I think one of the themes, I don't know if I've deliberately sought this out, but a lot of my roles have been focused around building product or sort of fixing product and how product interacts with engineering. And so I think I've developed a philosophy around that, which I think we're going to get into more in the discussion. But I think in terms of how I like to lead, I think it's really focused around helping people understand what the goals are, right? And making sure everyone's aligned around a common vision, and then letting people run, like giving them space to make decisions and feel empowered to do that. And really trying to promote an ownership mentality, right? If you view yourself as, the buck stops here with whatever my scope is, then I think that's the right mentality to drive good decisions. And so that's what I try to do, and then knock down barriers, keeping people are butting their heads against process that doesn't make sense or lack of communication. Those are things I can help with as a leader to help them do more.
Love that. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about that accountability piece a bit later. Thanks, Toby. All right, Shannon.
Hi, everyone. Shannon Smith here. I would say I grew up in sort of a larger organization, big enterprise company where I spent time in quality roles, in development roles, and then really started to grow in my desire to lead people. I jokingly say I like people more than I like software. It's probably a little more than a joke. It's true, but what I mean by that is I see that every person on a team has a unique thing to bring to the team. That's both their skill set and their experiences. And so as far as leadership philosophy, it's really valuing the differences we have and then the energy and the productivity that can come by combining efforts across a disparate set of people. I spent a lot of time in that larger enterprise, and then more recently over the past few years have kind of found a passion for trying to help smaller companies that have kind of found a niche that they're trying to grow a team around and build out in the local Raleigh startup scene. So I spent some time in a small firm, growing up the engineering team from just a few to a couple dozen. More recently joined to own a global company, a startup. We were just over 100 people, but we're based out of Barcelona. We're trying to build the world's first knowledge integration platform. And the idea there is that so many of us have so many different applications that store our data, from communication between teams or email or storing documents. And we want to make that knowledge accessible and useful and keep it private. And so we're building up a team here in Raleigh to supplement our team over in Barcelona, and I get the chance to help grow that team both in size but also in our process, and that's part of my passions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shannon and team. I failed to mention that you can enter your questions in the Q&A box at any time, and we'll be sure to address them at the end. So moving on, I wanted to kind of set the scene a little bit about something that I'd read that I found interesting. McKinsey released this report, and it was discussing the factors that made the biggest impact on business performance in relation to software development and developer velocity. And in part of the report, it found that culture, tools, and ensuring on time and on budget releases were the top 3 drivers of business success. And obviously there's a lot to kind of dive into there. For the purposes of today's call, I wanted to focus on the people piece, of course. And so when it comes to culture, it was psychological safety, collaboration, and continuous improvement that made the biggest impact. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on these findings, if there's anything that you found to be surprising, or if you tend to agree with this report. And I'll start with you, Toby.
Sure. Yeah, I think, that's an interesting list: culture, tools, and ensuring on time and on budget release, right? I think how you measure success in, call it product delivery or software delivery, I think is a direct reflection of the culture, right? And so I think we're in this industry, and I think probably our audience is this is near and dear to everyone's experience, right? We're going through this transformation from sort of waterfall process to agile. And I think the cultural impact of, are we tracking our ability to forecast dates, or are we tracking the success and quality of a release, and are we working on the right things? I think that's a key thing that stood out to me in this, where there's a little bit of a dichotomy there of we're hanging on to this notion of a waterfall delivery date versus empowering and rapid learning and iteration, which I think are more values of an agile culture. I think when it comes to that, if we unpack that cultural piece, having the big drivers being psychological safety, collaboration, and continuous improvement, I think those all represent where we want to be, right? And I think fit in that concept of empowering not just an individual, but a team with a common goal, and success is based on removing barriers, making sure we understand that that we are empowered. Like psychological safety, I think, is about feeling empowered, right? That I'm empowered to make decisions. I'm empowered to make mistakes, right? And there's value in making mistakes because we can learn from that. And if we can do that quickly, we're going to end up with a better outcome. So that's my thoughts.
So out of curiosity, and this can be for any of you guys if you want to answer, how would you address the psychological safety piece? Like, you know, are there any examples of things that you've seen work? Do you call that out directly? Like, how do you create that safe space and say, like, it is okay to make mistakes? I'm just thinking about it from, you know, the employee perspective.
The thing that comes to mind for me is, you know, how one thing that's really important, especially from as a leader of the organization, is, well, how do you react when something happens that you didn't expect or didn't go the way you were expected, right? Are we reacting from the perspective of saying, okay, what did we learn from this and what are we going to do differently, versus saying, why did you do this, right? Those are two different things. And so one of the things I learned over the years, and also was called out from some leadership coaches that I work with, is that even simple actions like changing the type of question you're asking, change from why to what, change from why to how, really can make a difference in how people perceive their safety in this scenario, right? We're not questioning you as a human. We're not questioning, you know, do you have merit? We're questioning, how did we arrive at a place? What were the opportunities to make changes that we took or didn't take? And what would we do differently the next time, so that when we restart a process, we're starting from an elevated position of learning rather than restarting back from where we started before.
I think that also, you know, there's the relationship between us as leaders and those that are on our team and providing that safety there. I think the collaboration piece and the psychological safety piece really tie closely together, because not only do I want folks to be safe with me and the way that I'm interacting with them, but we want a culture of psychological safety where people can go to others around them. And to me, the collaboration piece starts with recognizing and then valuing the differences that we have. You know, a lot of times in our development teams, like there's, you know, the person that is like they've been there the longest, they know all the things, and that can be really important. But there's also an importance to the new person who sees things from a different perspective. I think what we, you know, as leaders have that those folks on the team don't have is just a broader perspective on what's going on, both within the product team, the development team, but also across the company, especially you as CEO and Toby in product. Like, we have conversations with folks that spread across the organization. So I might hear like, oh, like Hirsch is telling me about this thing that's going on, but then there's a team member, you know, let's say Bob is on the team and they're having this problem. I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, that sounds a lot like so-and-so, you know, maybe it's what I heard from Hirsch. Why don't we get together? And so like some practices around that I've seen be effective, and they even are more necessary now as we're all remote, is leveraging that sort of that knowledge that we have to help build in this collaboration. Like, so I can take this person who knows that and this person that knows that and bring them into a conversation together. You know, in a office setting, maybe it's pulling a group of folks into the room that normally wouldn't be in the room together and sort of setting that up. Or in today's world, it's like, hey, let's schedule a time for just me to introduce you to so-and-so. You know, we're split across Europe and the US, and, you know, we have to deal with those time zones, but we can get folks on a call early morning our time, get them talking, and I can kind of back up and let them start to go, right? Then the differences between people's personality comes into it too, as us as leaders. Is like, I have to recognize that maybe Toby is super comfortable putting together a presentation to give out, you know, to a large group, but maybe Carolina's not. And so as I'm interacting with Carolina, like, I'm that knowledge of her as a person, you know, that again ties back into that psychological safety. Like, we can be open and honest about things. I know she's not super comfortable in that one setting. So maybe for her, I pull her into a couple small meetings and kind of build up that collaboration across people. And for me, the sort of the piece de resistance is like when my team comes to me and says, well, I had this problem, but I knew you were just going to tell me to go talk to Carolina. So I just went and talked to her anyway. Because that's when you start to build that culture of collaboration, when people see it as like, this is how we do business. And one of the things that I've done inside the team is just set up some operating principles. And one of them is own it. So like the idea that your name's on everything, like an artist signs their work, make it better. So whatever you do, you know, take that to the next level. But then the last one is collaborate, and just pushing the idea that we know things that others don't, and we're better as a team when we leverage each other to get that knowledge in the same place.
I think it's hard to work together on something if you don't know what the outcome looks like, right? And so I think particularly I've seen this more in large organizations where there's lots of things happening, or even in small organizations where there's a lot of work streams. If it's not clear what the goals are, everybody's going to pick a goal and work on it, right? And I think so. I think that's a primary job of a leader, is to make sure we've got alignment on where are we heading, and if we're not, go tackle that, right? Because I think, and I'll give you an example. You know, there's this sort of historical product versus engineering mentality, right? Of, well, product wants to do this, you know, they build the requirements and pitch them over the wall to engineering, and engineering builds them, and then they don't meet, and there's this sort of, it sort of sets up a conflict almost in the organization, and I think anyone who's been in either side of that knows what I'm talking about, right? And that's not what good looks like. Good looks like, hey, let's understand, like, what are we trying to solve for the customer, right? And it may be my job to represent requirements of that customer, but I don't have all the answers, right? So let's actually, you know, talking to a development team, you guys are the ones figuring out the hard stuff, right? Of how do we actually deliver this? Let's work on this together, right? And in fact, you may have had interactions with customers directly when something broke or didn't work right. And so let's learn together on that, and let's have that collaborative discussion and set the vision together. And then I think the ability to collaborate is much easier because we've already built this shared understanding of the problem we're trying to solve.
Toby, I think that North Star mentality is critical, right? So if we all say we know we're going over that way, now when I'm pulling folks together back to that collaboration conversation and saying, hey, Toby, I need you to talk to Hirsch. It's not like, oh, I got to go outside of my job and I got to go help that person. It's like, no, we're all headed that way. And so this is a part of us getting there. So I love the idea of setting goals, whether that's at the company level, at the product level, or maybe just at the whole engineering team level, so that everyone knows this is where we're going. And I bet you guys have seen, you have to say it over and over and over to make sure that that vision is there. But as leaders, the more we can put that out in front of people, the more I think we'll see people meld into like, oh yeah, we are going that way. Oh yeah, I can help in this way.
Yeah.
Something that we talk about a lot at Allstacks is this idea of social contracts, right? There's social contracts across your peer organizations, but then there's social contracts between every member of the company all the way up to the senior leadership of the company. And one of the things that's interesting there is we're always constructing and iterating this framework where we say, okay, well, what are the objectives and goals of the company at the highest level, right? What's the one thing that we're trying to do? And then what are the key drivers of that thing? And then what are the key drivers of the drivers, right? And the sub-drivers. And then what happens is as you break that down and all the inputs ultimately to the system that results in that one outcome, you can start mapping that back to the roles and responsibilities of each person, organization, and team inside of your overall company, so that you talk about how do we know where we're going, right? And how do we develop an intuition about the decisions, those micro decisions we're making that's not recorded in a JIRA ticket. Well, that can really be bolstered if I, as a developer, could trace through my objectives, the objectives of my team, the objectives of my department, the objectives of my company, all the way back to that key initiative. So when I do X, that changes Y, which changes Z, which changes A, which changes B, and now I know how I've contributed to that overall accomplishment. And Toby, you talked about this earlier. If you can do that and build that intuition, then when you come and you say, okay, I represent the requirements, but I don't know everything, it also helps kind of deconstruct that perennial objection. Well, the requirements weren't clear enough, right? Things weren't verbose enough. Because there's no way to encapsulate every decision you need to make when developing a piece of software for a developer into a Jira ticket, into some kind of set of requirements, because every developer is making these micro decisions through their day that are ultimately impacting the product and the customer experience. Well, if we all know where we're trying to go, we can make those decisions kind of seamlessly and without friction, and we're not worried about making those decisions and getting punished for it later, because we have that safety inside of our framework.
So my question for you guys is, what you guys are saying makes a lot of sense. How do you then incorporate the changing of priorities in real time, right? Because, we build roadmaps, we have these plans, and even when you do remain agile, things change pretty quickly. So how do you maintain that North Star, but make room for, these changing demands, the changing priorities, and then ensure that everybody is working off one source of truth? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. The reality is we're all in the technology industry, right? In some form or fashion. And changes always, right? It doesn't matter if you're agile or lean or old school waterfall, things change, right? And I think it's constant vigilance. Number one, you got to be aware of change. And then I think it's, how do you make sure everyone's on board? You just got to talk until you're blue in the face. I think like communicating, I think there's probably studies about this, but like people have to hear things 7 times, right? And I find myself getting tired of saying the same thing over and over again, but also realizing like, I said it once to my team, it doesn't mean everyone heard it. And if I say it twice, then maybe some more people heard it, but people outside the organization may not, like it may not have cascaded the way I expected it to, right? And so that repetition, and just being clear about, it's okay to say the same thing over and over again, just because the goal is that everyone understands a decision that was made and something changed, right? And so I think just repetition and over communicating, especially when you're seeing higher rates of change, right? Because you can't assume everyone got the memo, or because everyone's got a full day, everyone's got a full calendar, right? And the reality is not everyone reads every email that comes across their inbox. So I think, to me, that's kind of near and dear on a single source of truth, or how do you make sure everyone's aligned? Like people need the opportunity to hear it, right, and process it, and sometimes that repetition helps.
Yeah, Toby, totally agree. We do have to say things over and over and over. I think that's both on the what's changing, but also the why. Hirsch mentioned it earlier about switching up the questions you're asking about when there's an issue. But I think that also we got to recognize that, engineers get a bad rap, I think, of being sort of, they're machines who are just all logic focused and developing, these great solutions. But the reality is they're humans too. And when change happens, that's disruptive to not just kind of the work you're doing, but like how you're feeling about things. Like you maybe start to question things like, what? No, that was important. Why is that not important anymore? Mm-hmm. So bringing in the why of the change happened, and then just reiterating that over and over about here's where we're headed. Like, yes, that product decision changed, but what we're about as an organization, where we're headed, that hasn't changed. Just we had new information come in, and now that means we got to shift a little bit. And giving them a chance to voice that frustration too I think is a key part of it. I use one-on-ones for that. I just open the door up and say, like, how's it going? And sometimes that's people unloading of like, this is not good. Like, I don't like this. And they don't use those words necessarily, but like they let me know, like, this is how I'm feeling about that. And I think letting that come out actually helps us to disagree and commit, right? Like, yeah, we were doing that. Now I'm frustrated about that, but I know where we're headed and I agree. Like, let's go there. But please don't do this too many times to me, right? Like, you don't want that constant change.
One problem is that we're talking about repeating things and reinforcing what we're saying, not just the what, but also the why. But also there's this question of, well, how many layers through which was that information transmitted, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it takes 7 rounds of telephone before that information finally gets down to the people who are directly impacted by the decision, not just does the message get a lot softer and diffuse, but it also feels like, okay, well, was this information discovered a long time ago? It took a long time to get to me. I invested all this effort into this action, right? I put a part of myself into this work, and now that work is being discarded, right? So there's a couple things there. Like, one, can we value the work that maybe isn't getting carried forward in some way? How do we recognize that accomplishment? Then the other thing is, how do we shortcut the transmittal of information, right? How do we draw the straight line? One thing that I find really effective, which only applies in some cases, but what I love to do is I really love to get folks from my team, product and engineering, actually face-to-face with the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Because the empathetic and emotional response to watching someone use the thing that you've built, it's both glorious and painful at the same time, right? It's like listening to yourself talk. But when you can reduce the number of steps between someone who is originating the thing you have to propagate to the person who's receiving that information, the message is clearer, it feels more impactful,
Mm-hmm.
it feels more empathetic. And so what are the different ways where we can reinforce that over and over?
I think that's a really great reminder, Hirsch, about just, we're all working on something and in, a bubble, unless we continuously ask for that feedback. And it may look very different in the wild than, in the container of our day-to-day work. I'm going to ask you guys one question before I give the participants an opportunity to chime in and make sure that they, they're able to ask questions. So, I think we've talked about alignment, collaboration, and the fact that things are in constant flux. And, data and metrics is really important to us. At our organization at All Stacks, and is really kind of one of the foundational elements of how we work and how we empower other people. I'd like to ask the question then of, how do you use data and metrics effectively? And this kind of goes back to some earlier statements that you guys had about how you measure success. So, at the end of the day, we all have to hit certain things in order to keep the business afloat and really keep in mind what we're all here for. So maybe just talking a little bit about that, about what success looks like and how you guys use data to achieve these goals. And I don't know if Hirsch, you want to start.
Sure, I'll start. For me, what data provides is the ability to reduce surprises. So, Toby was talking earlier about the old, like, we're fixated on a date, we're driving towards that date, and no matter what, we're going to hit that date. And the problem there is, like, inevitably you're not going to hit the date, and things are going to change, and you learn the information partway through that's going to change what you're doing and how you're doing it. All the things we've talked about so far. So what is the goal of the data? Well, can we arm ourselves with the information such that we can mitigate the impact of things changing, right? And the best way we can mitigate the impact of things changing is that the change, the impact of the change is frequently actually an emotional response, right? I had geared myself up to expect something, and that expectation has changed. And I'm upset about the expectation changing more than I am about the change itself. So if we can minimize the delta on the changes, the delta that we experienced between the last time we heard it change and this time we heard it change, then we can also minimize the impact of the surprise that we're feeling every time it does change, because the change is inevitable. So what can we do with the delta, with the data? Well, with the data, we can look for patterns, we can look for internal consistency, we can look for deviations from our expectations, and we can find them earlier than later. And when we find them earlier than later, then we're afforded the opportunity to prepare for the changing outcome, which then allows us to then not have that emotional response at the point of change, which then makes us better prepared to move forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the very beginning, we're not saying, why did it change? We're saying, what created this circumstance? What did we learn from it? And how are we going to respond to it? That's a totally different conversation than, why didn't you deliver this on time?
Yeah, I think I like what you said, that our reaction to change often is emotional, right? And I think data is kind of the ultimate storyteller in a way. And I think it can help, like if there's a difference between, hey, let's switch directions because I think it's the right thing to do, right? And I think that has a propensity to invoke even a larger emotional change. Well, what if I don't agree with you? Or, it goes into like, well, I don't trust you. You don't have a good track record. Like none of that actually matters. Right. But it doesn't help me just relying on my opinion doesn't help me tell the story of why. Right. And so I think having a story that's told by data allows that emotional reaction to get set aside, because it actually plays into the empowerment theme as well. Everyone can view the same story, right, and come to their own conclusion. Like you don't have to trust my opinion or my better judgment or my, I have more experience. Like none of that matters. Here's the data. Maybe there's some interpretations of that, but at least we're all aligned around the same reality, right? And I think that goes a long way, right? Where I can tell you blue is better than green, for 100 different reasons. But if I could point to a study to say, well, blue's better than green for this in this case, and here's why, and here's the experiment, then it's like, oh, okay, now I get it, right? So it can go a long way to helping people move forward and have a shared understanding too.
One sort of slightly different take on that, but it hits on a lot of what both Chris and Toby said is, we've talked about hitting dates and delivering. One of the moves I'm trying to do, and it's fresh for me, and it's a little difficult, is to move away from the binary, did we deliver or did we not deliver, and more into the what were we trying to change. So this says, instead of we're going to deliver feature X, well, it's the why behind feature X. Like we're trying to drive this, customer behavior or this change in kind of our performance of our application. That's a little more difficult, but what I found is it pushes that onus onto the team to say, well, if the goal is change of whatever the metric is, they have freedom in there to figure out how that might work, how we might instigate that delta. And so that's from the product manager to the engineers to say, all right, our objective isn't to hit, September 24th, to deliver feature X. It's really to empower our users or to do whatever it is. And you have to think more about that. It really, to me, it puts the engineering side back into software engineering. It says, we have problems to solve, not software to deliver. So how do we solve those problems? Then you can measure, hopefully, those outcomes that you were shooting for. So it's just moving away from a delivery measurement into the outcomes that you're looking for.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree outcomes are really the key there.
Mm.
Well, thank you guys so much for all of those insights. For those of you on the call, would love to hear from you. If you guys have any questions, feel free to enter those in the QA. While you're doing that, I know that a question that comes up a lot in these types of conversations is, folks are trying to continuously improve their team, right? So they're always like, what is considered good progress? So I'm curious to know like how you guys kind of think about that, and how you measure good progress. And I think it can be difficult if everybody's kind of looking at their neighbor being like, well, what's good progress for Toby might be different than for Allstacks and other organizations. So would love to hear your thoughts there.
It's me joining companies that are a little younger, trying to get off the ground. Sometimes it's about trying to establish a certain culture. So progress might be around, delivering or achieving outcomes as we've talked about so far, but it may also be, we want more of an ownership culture. We want people with the founder mentality, and that goes into hiring, like how we're looking at each candidate, like what do they bring, like what's their experience, and do they behave in that way? But also within the team, we have to give permission for folks to take our vision and then apply it and implement it in a certain way. As a leader, we can't, command and control every decision that's been made. So, but we have to see within the team people stepping into that, and so celebrating things when someone does see a problem, solve a problem that they maybe owned end to end, or they reached out to start collaborating on their own. And so for me, there's some measures of how is the culture shifting toward the type of team we want to have that really indicate if we're progressing toward where we want to be.
Yeah, some things are easier to measure objectively, right? Whether that's sort of outcome-based software delivery or feature-based, or, what's our velocity, right? Those things, processes lend themselves well to metrics to measure improvement over time. And I think if you talk about cultural change, that can be a little harder, right? It's certainly more subjective. But I think applying kind of the same framework to, well, let's set some goals, right? What are the outcomes that we want from a cultural change? It is measurable, right? And it may be a little bit more subjective, right? It's not a numerical outcome, but maybe it's just a matter of surveying people once a quarter and tracking that, right? So I think it's a clear what the outcome is that we want to be, setting that shared goal, and then making sure there's ways to measure it, right? And going back and saying, actually, let's be honest, here's the goal we set a year ago, and we didn't actually do anything. Like, we did all this other stuff, which is great, but let's kind of regroup and do we think this is still important? And if so, let's prioritize this, right? So I think it's that reflection and that retrospective is important too, but having a plan and agreeing on that plan and then putting stuff in place to measure it. It doesn't have to be science, right? It doesn't have to be statistically relevant sample size, and right. Sometimes it's just anecdotal, but if you don't ask the questions, then you're not going to know. Which I think measuring is important too.
I had a mentor a long time ago to tell me that, the goal of the startup, getting the company to a place where you can almost treat it like a black box, where I know that when you put in X, I'm going to get Y out, and the model inside is going to be delivered. And there's some subtleties to that, which are pretty interesting. But one thing I think about a lot in terms of progress is, are we tending towards reliability and predictability? And so if you think about that kind of manifests in a lot of different ways. And I always think about it in terms of derivatives, right? So everything can get measured up and to the right, right? Are we always improving? Are we always getting better? But what I actually want to know is, what is the stability of that line, right? Are we up and to the right because of a Herculean effort at the end of the quarter, or are we up and to the right because we make steady incremental progress every day? And the more granular, you can get there in your steady, discrete improvement, the more predictable you are, the more reliable you are, which means that across all angles of the business, everyone just has this both implicit and explicit trust in everything that everyone is saying, right? Toby says, yeah, I'm confident that this is the product we're going to build, and we have a good understanding of the customer, and this is the direction we're going to go. And Shannon says, yeah, and my team feels really confident about executing it. And I think we'll get it out when we decided to get it out within reason, and we feel good about it. And well, then Caroline, I can look at Toby and Shannon and say, great, you guys always pretty much do what you say you're going to do, and so I can build the plan about helping the customers understand what value they're going to get around it, so that when it all lands at the same time within reason, and we all are able to celebrate together, right? And that perspective comes from that. How do we tend towards predictable, reliable, internally consistent? Because then we've bred this culture of just explicit and implicit trust across every aspect of the business.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I have been part of organizations and projects where everybody's hustling at the end, and maybe we met the goal, but at the expense of some other things that we had to sacrifice, which isn't always necessarily the outcome that we want. So have to kind of be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, it's not sustainable either, right? And so
Right.
you tend towards a culture of burnout, and that's not what we want. I really like the way you said that, Hirsch. I think that's a good view of it.
Any other questions? Everybody's a little quiet today. Any final thoughts or parting words for the group?
From my perspective, any leader that is you're charged with delivery, you're charged with hitting certain numbers, and we can't get lost in those and forget that we're working with people, right? And those people are on our team now, and they have their own personal goals, their professional goals, and so there's a bit of how do we work together with them now to achieve the things we want to do, but also how do we invest in them to help them get to where they want to get to? Because as Hirsch, you've seen multiple times, like there's a couple different companies here. Like we're rolling through our careers ourselves as leaders, and having that good relationship with that team is 10 years down the road, you can call them up and be like, hey, remember when we used to work together? Like I'd love for you to come join. Like I feel like it's there's a payoff both for that individual and their career, for us in our career, but really for the company. Like you're going to instill loyalty in your team. They're going to feel cared about. They're going to be more productive. And so while as engineering leaders, as product leaders, like we can be focused on outcomes, as we've talked about on the technical side, we can't get lost in just that. We have to remember we're people, they're people, and the world's probably a better place if we invest in that side of things too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think sort of top of mind for me is when we talked a lot about communication, but I think there's a lot of value in being transparent too. Mm-hmm. Like we're all adults, right? And sometimes we make mistakes, and we talked about sort of giving people permission to do that, right? That's part of empowerment. It's not a bad thing. It's what we do with that information, right? But I think part of transparency is just owning that, right? And it goes back to, what's the culture you're building? Do people feel safe? Is there an environment that you can admit your mistakes? Because it's better for everyone to know where we're at and how we move forward. Or do we need to sort of have all these closed door meetings and, only share the outcomes? And my philosophy is really around transparency, and I encourage my team to be that way as well. But I think, as a leader, this is one of those areas where you teach by doing, right? People are going to learn. If you're transparent, then they're going to be transparent. And if you're not, they're not going to feel safe. So that's been a focus for me recently, and just wanted to share that because I think that can be really powerful, right? Particularly when there's stressful situations or a lot of change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. Owning the moments that led up to the decision are important, and owning the mistakes you personally make and how that impacted others is important. I think it falls on deaf ears if you say, you know, it's safe to make mistakes, but I don't make mistakes, right?
Mm.
It's safe, but you know, it's not actually safe. We're all humans, like Shannon's saying. We're a set of humans working towards a common goal, and because we're humans, it's going to be an imprecise approximation of the outcome when we get there. So we'll try to do the best we can.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, and I think others will as well. I think I will wrap things up. I know we could talk all day, but I want to be mindful of everybody else's time and get back to work. I will be, once again, sending everybody the recording and some resources about what we talked about today, like the McKinsey report, in case you're curious about that. If you have any questions for the group, feel free to email info@allstacks.com, and I'll be sure to transmit it to whoever is the question is for. And if you're interested in seeing a demo of Allstacks and our solution, we have a group demo coming up on October 14th. That'll be midday. And you're also welcome to just sign up anytime to do a one-on-one demo. And with that, I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and thanks again for joining us.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.